guest curator and our collector to an audience. Each of those was a book tour. So I guess it's about time that we did our own program. And this is it. You're about to enjoy a tour of what is actually a fairly small portion of a very large collection, many of which are of national significance. It's our good fortune that Rick lives not too far away from here, and that he is as generous as he is with sharing his collection with the public. Rick was born and raised in London, Ontario. He became interested in collecting from a fairly early age, and eventually focused on motorcycles and bicycles. He spent most of his working life at Fort Talbot. For about 40 years, maybe more, he has literally rescued examples of important Canadian artifacts before they disappeared into the US. And when necessary, he has conserved and restored them, probably better than many museums could. He has an interest in the history of his cycles as he is in the inherent mechanical attributes, and he's even ridden some of them. There's nothing like using an artifact to understand how it works, and occasionally falling off them. We're not likely to have an exhibit this popular for a while. I had to go back to 2011 to find our most popular exhibit before this, and it was oddly enough on the history of the toilet. No reflection on your collection. People have been coming to this show from far and wide, and it has given the museum an entirely new audience. This is partly thanks to Rick's social media presence, which is pretty extensive, but a lot of it has come from the tremendous amount of media exposure that this show has attracted. And I wanted to mention specifically the Globe and Mail. I don't think our museum is going to get into the Globe and Mail again for a while. And so, just in case you forgot that you were in the Globe and Mail, we decided we'd stick that page into a frame for you so you could hang it on the wall and remember the great year that you spent here. So, wow. Thank you very much for sharing your collection and for sharing the amount of time that you had with us.
Most gracious of you guys.
Hold on to that, and then if you want to place it somewhere, in fact, I can take it away.
Okay, thank you.
I know you like those historic frames.
Yes.
And we put the little picture from the front page in the back. It's actually literally on the front page of the Globe and Mail, June the 1st. So it's been a...
Thank you. Thank you.
So with that, I'll turn things over to Rick.
Thank you, Mike. First off, too, Mike, I would like to thank you and this young lady over here and the staff from St. Thomas Heritage Museum. This has been a great traveling through time, I guess, and without riding the bike, I get to just walk and talk. But needless to say, we'll get involved with this. Usually I start over in this area here, primarily with this bicycle right here. This is a very rare high wheel. It belongs to the museum. I built them to stand so now they can present it to the public in a more fashionable manner and to conserve it better so they're not gluing it to a board or something. So it's an 1885 Gould, made in Brantford, Ontario. It's one of 3 or 4 known to exist. I have one in the collection also. But the information is long gone where it came from, but it does not matter. It's here. It's being enjoyed now and for prosperity. It has its original badge on the back. When I first saw this bike, it was 25 years or more ago when they used to store all the belongings over on Church Street. And it was clamped around the head badge at the back. They call it the head badge, but this is the backbone badge. And they had a clamp over top of it. And I discussed with the curator at that time that they had to remove that because that was the single most valuable part of the whole bicycle. It identified the bike. it was its marker. It was like taking its identification away from it. Unless you were an astute collector like myself, I could walk up and identify the bike immediately. But for the museum to lose that, they would have lost all trace of what it was. It's a nice old girl. This is the way it deserves to be shown and enjoyed to the public. And I think it's very fortunate to see it here in St. Thomas, because it shows you that time frame when those boys on the wall were riding through town. This is what they were riding on. Well, moving from here, we'll move into the old bicycle shop equipment. This machine at the back here. So when you come into a bicycle shop, say this bicycle broke down and the fellow will go, oh, I need a new wooden rim. Instead of the proprietor keeping an inventory of just 32 spoke rims, he would go to the shelf and pull a blank down. He would take it over to this machine here, which is an indexing drilling machine. And you hear it clicking. Well, it's clicking for 32 spokes, or I would adjust it to 36 and so on. And a young fellow would likely be working in the bicycle shop, helping the proprietor to keep ahead of the game. And what his job might be is just sitting here and drilling out the spokes. So he would pull this lever down here, rotate like this, and drill out the spokes, and move it to the next guy, and so on. Once he's done that job, then he will dismantle it off of here and mount it onto this jig. And this is a lacing jig. The hub would be centered inside here, and he would run the spokes. What this stops the wheel from doing is going oblong. So once he gets that established, then it goes to this truing stand. So then the young fellow would have it all laced up, and he'd be turning it like this, and if it went to the left or the right, he would tighten the right spoke or the left spoke, and that's how they trued the wheel. Just to make sure that's safe for me, I'll put that back there. And if he had to make spokes, he had this device. He would loosen this lever off here. He would put his blank in here. He would feed it into the die, and it would pull it. And he could spin out a ton of spokes in a matter of minutes, where they used to have to hand crank them. So this machine enabled it. This was invented around 1885. So it was used on the high wheel era and then used all the way up into the pneumatic era. And there's various artifacts here, CCM boxes, there's a rim cement box. This is an actual bicycle stand that would have been used in a bicycle shop. So this bicycle wheel would have sat in here like so, and would have held it in place so you could display the bike. It's about 1896. There's only maybe 3 of these known. They don't last because a lot of people burnt them. And then moving over to here, you can see some packing crate boards. That's the actual signage from this workshop, from this bicycle repair shop. All this bicycle repair equipment came out of an original bicycle shop in New Hampshire. And a friend gathered it before they reclaimed the building. And this bicycle work stand came out of the same place. It's what they call an articulated work stand. At the base is a little pedal. So the worker can press the pedal, it's a brake, and the bike would lock into place. And then he could work on the gearing or the bearings and repair it, and then put it back into place. This device locks the front wheel from hitting him in the head every time he moves the bike around. And it moves around, it'll move around. It's a handy piece. They're still using devices like that today. And then from there, we're jumping right into the motorcycle era just because it's in this position. This is a 1901 Lampson. It's the only Lampson motorcycle known to exist in the world. I found the motor in the Finger Lakes in New York. Actually, last week was the anniversary of it from Madison Buckville Antique Fair. That's where I got the lead on it. From a picker guy that was picking boathouse in Kananagwe, New York, in the Finger Lakes region, and found the motor mounted into a little children's skip, a little boat to puddle around in the water. And it had a jack shaft on it. The engine stamped on the other side of the engine cases with Lampson from Abington, Mass. And never knew anything more about this bike except the engine. And as time went on, a friend had found me this advertisement right here. And from finding that advertisement, I bought a pile of bicycle frames in Tilsonburg out of a tobacco kiln. And amongst those frames, unknown to me till I got that advertisement, I had this frame. They joined together, and it's all history now. Between myself and Jim Carson from Blenheim, we worked on this diligently together, and we worked and got this to where you see it now. I handmade the carburetor. I copied an original, and this was casted from a friend, and then I machined it in my 1930s style machine shop. And it's a fine example. The factory still stands, and the Lampson family still exists, but they never knew this motorcycle was even around or even was made by their great-great-grandfather. So it's a cool piece, and like a lot of Americans say, and it's in Canada. It's in a good collection. I'll take care of it as long as I'm on the face of the earth, and maybe I can pass it on to the next individual that has the same mentality I have to this stuff. And then moving on over here, this is a grate from Goderich, Ontario. Goderich was known for the Henderson bicycle, and it was very short-lived. David Henderson, which is pictured here, top, he bought the foundry and just down from the Knox United Church in Goderich. And I think now it's a shuffleboard building company or a fitness center now. The building still stands. It's the only existing Canadian bicycle manufacturing building left in Canada. CCM's long gone. It's all houses now. And this grate came from the foundry. There was 4 grates. I'm still trying to buy the other 3. And there was 4 grates that they would have lifted off and shoveled coal into the hopper to feed the furnaces to the foundry. And I was fortunate enough to get this from a guy in Goderich. And now it's part of the collection. I have some other memorabilia, but I still have not found a Goderich bike. And there's a reason. They were poorly made. Through the correspondence that I have around 200 correspondence from bicycle shops all around Ontario, threatening liable suits and all kinds of stuff against the company because the crank arm. If you look here in this diagram, once you move around, you'll see the crank arm is offset from the main axle. They all broke. They left fellows destitute in the countryside trying to push their bicycles back to where they started. And complaints. You know, you're spending $85 to $125 on a bicycle in 1896. That's a lot of money. You know, average guy wasn't making $1 a day. But that's a cool piece of Canadian history, a rare piece of Canadian history. And in the Huronia Museum up in Goderich, you can see examples of the Henderson bicycle if you ponder to go into their museum. I support all museums. It's the only access we have to looking at some of our great Canadian history, and they should be explored extensively and funded. Unfortunately, our fearless government don't fund our museums like they used to. And then up here in this bike up here is about an 1897 Crescent. It was made in Chicago by the Western Wheel Works Company. This bike was found in the attic of a hardware store in Mount Bridges. And I bought it from the daughter of the previous owner. She was 91. She was selling it in a yard sale in Mount Bridges. She had 2 of them, and I missed the other one, but I got this one. And it sat there for eons. And then her family sold the hardware store, and then she moved into a modest little split-level house. and she would sell crafts from her driveway and yard sales. And this happened to be there, and one of my buddies spotted it, called me, and I was there in a heartbeat. And now it's part of the collection. And then below it in the showcase, you'll see different accessories and cool stuff. The far right trophy is the only known St. Thomas bicycle race trophy. It's got high wheelers on it. The middle trophy is from the Montreal races in 1900. And that's an 1897 Toronto race trophy. Trophies are very hard to come by in Canada for cycle. A lot of them got bought and shipped to the US, and then some of them smelted down for their silver, unfortunately. Over here you have a Cycle Poco camera that you would have mounted to your handlebars. When you were done riding, you would mount it to a clamp on your handlebars and use it as a steady for your photography. So you get a still image, and there's the hood and everything. That carry-all case would be strapped to your bicycle, as you can see there. And then there's printer's blocks, another early packing crate board from CCM. And then getting back to CCM, I talk about this in great depth because the whole industry changed by 1900 in cycling. In the US, three fellas, Mr. Garford, A.G. Spalding of Spalding Sporting Good fames, Colonel Albert Pope, a famous bicycle entrepreneur that brought the high wheel bicycle to North America. And they formed a group called the ABC. They went around America and bought up all the mom and pop bicycle builders and shops and forced them to sell their product line. They were on their way to Canada by 1898. And all the families and bicycle builders in Canada joined hands together and formed the Canadian Cycle Motor Company. They unionized themselves to protect our Canadian industry and formed CCM, which we all grew up and loved. So that history out of the page, you know, it just changed our whole persona of our bicycle industry in Canada, enabled us to enjoy our own industry. For a short time, it got bought out by the Chinese in 1971. But over here is a unique piece I brought in specially for you guys today, just for this show day. And it's an 1885 Columbia Light Roadster men's tricycle with 40-inch wheels. It's one of 3 in the world. I found this bike about 1998. I was at a motorcycle event in New Jersey, and this fellow approached me. He goes, "What's with you motorcycle guys? They're all tough and you don't want to talk and you act silly." And I go, "Here's the lawn chair. Sit down and have a nice tea with me." So we started chatting. He goes, "Well, what I'm here for, I'm trying to find somebody to give me information about a tricycle on my uncle's farm." I said, "Okay, tell me about it." He says, "Well, it's a Columbia. Is that what it says on its head badge?" He says, "No, it doesn't have a head badge. It has a head badge at the back of the bike. It says Columbia Roadster." As soon as he said that, I dropped everything. I said, "How far away is this?" He said, "It's about an hour and 15 minutes from here. It's up in Sussex County, New Jersey." So my son was with me. He was about 14 at the time. And I said to my close buddy, I said, "Mike, take the kid. I got to head north." And so he took my son south to Jersey Shore, and I headed north. I got to the farm. I met this great old fella. He was 84 at that time. And he went on to tell me the story that him and his brother were riding this bicycle up in the mountainside. They rode it down the mountainside. They got going too fast. The brother was standing on the back axle while the other brother was sitting in the seat. And they just obliterated the wheels. They rolled down the hill with it, and they knew, oh, it was their grandfather's bike. They knew if he found out, they would get a whooping. So they carried it up in the hillside where there was an old logging truck, a Model T truck, and they hid it inside the cab. And that's where it sat till I found it. He said, "Well, we're going to have to go up the hillside to get this." And he said, "Just jump in the pickup." So he took me up the mountainside, and he goes, "The foundation over there at the top of the mountaintop was where the family first lived, and all the foundations were there." And he goes, We're here. So we get out of the truck, we walk around the back, and he pulls a pitchfork out, and I'm starting thinking dueling banjos or something. And he goes, "You're going to need this, son." And I go, "Why?" And he goes, "You got to walk down that hillside to get over to them woods over there to find that trike." And I go, "What's the pitchfork?" He said, "The hillside's covered in copperheads." So I'm pushing the grass away, and I'm walking by the foundation. I see a Harley Davidson frame sitting there and some wheels. And I said, "What's going on with these wheels and this Harley frame?" He said, "That belonged to my brother." He said, "You can keep that." So I grabbed the frame, I tossed it out towards the vehicle, and then I went to pick up the tire, and immediately I got burnt. It was fire ants inside of it. So I dropped it on the ground, I pulled my knife out, and I skinned the tire off and shook all the ants out and threw it over. And he goes, "You better get heading down that hillside." So I hiked it down the hill, and I could see what was a remnant of a truck up in the woods. And I walked up there, and sure enough, it was sitting in the cab. No wheels. Wheels were gone. There was like fragments of spokes still sitting there. The rims had rotted away, and then it was like a 10 to 15 year restoration project. Like I was mentioning earlier, each one of those spokes took me 2.5 hours to make, and there's 60 spokes per wheel. So you can figure it out. And the rims are hand rolled, they're hollow. They're not just a crescent piece of metal, they're hollow. So there's 2 layers of metal there. And then the lacing, and had to build the braking mechanism. I copied it from the bicycle that's in the Ohio Museum, New Brennan Museum, and they have one of these, and I copied their brake mechanism and replaced the bike with the brake. So now it's one of 3 known in the world. And it's a fine example. Will I ride it? I might attempt it. I got to lose a couple of pounds. This average guy back then was only 5'7" and 147 pounds to 150 pounds. For a 200-pound man to get on there, I could start back to square one where I was before with the brothers that took the wheels off of it. But I guess we'll start to move this way now. We'll start off with this velocipede here. It's an 1869 French-made velocipede. This bike was found on the lower east side of Montreal by a fellow by the name of Marcel Lang. Marcel had it in his collection for a good number of years. He hired an Amish guy to rebuild the wheels. All this wood is original, 1869. All he did was get it refurbished and cleaned up and remounted to the, and you can see like he never embellished any paint on it. Here's your braking mechanism here. So you would roll your handlebars and you'd see the brake spoon going against the metal rim there. That's how you would actuate the brake. If you were getting on a bit of a grade or a hill, you would lift your feet off the wheels because these are fixed gear. They'll be continuously going. So the faster you go, these hit your shin bone. These are 20 pounds of brass. They'll crack your shin. So you lift your legs up and rest them here on each side. This curly cue here, remember again, affluent guys riding these bicycles, very wealthy people. These weren't impoverished people, these were wealthy. So he would have a servant close by. He would have a rope with a little knot in it. It would go in here and then lock into here. He would pull him along the road so he wouldn't have to tire himself. Here in Ontario, the first velocipede school showed up in London at where the London Regional Art Gallery is right now. The Royal Exchange Hall was there, and they had a velocipede school, and it was ran by Professor Bolt. He also came to St. Thomas and established a school here in St. Thomas with learning to ride the velocipede. Unfortunately, the velocipede era didn't last long. It ran from around February of '69 here in Ontario till about October, and the fad went away. It was like Beanie Babies. But it's a cool instrument, and it gives you kind of that idealism. Where are these fellas' minds? This doesn't predate cycling. There's earlier examples going far back as 1790s. with Baron von Dres of Slaverbaum, Germany. And he was the instrument of building the first bicycle. He took 2 wagon wheels and fashioned them to a plank. He would push himself through his vast gardens on his estate. And to steer it, he'd lift the bike up and aim it that way and then push it that way, and so on. But it enabled him to go through acreage faster than it would walking, comfortably. And it just evolved. The pedals came about in 1836 by Kirkpatrick Macmillan. Several things started changing, but by 1869, it was gone. They needed to evolve again. It was another evolutionary stage in cycles. Then came the transitional ordinary. You notice no more ironclad wheel. It's rubber. More suspension in the seat, still using the rolling braking mechanism, but they could get higher speeds and they could travel further on the landscape without tiring. Again, another period in the cycling that was short-lived, because by 1874, 75, the aerial was developed, which was a better cycle than the French had. And then by 78, the ordinary. Everybody refers to these as a penny farthing. Penny farthing was a derogatory term. It was developed by the gutter snipes in England. The gutter snipes were the fellows that worked up on the rooftop, soldering the gutters on your eaves. And they would yell down from their gutters to these fellows riding these bikes, "Hey, get off your penny farthing and ride a safety," because the safety was starting to be developed. So the penny farthing name carried on right into our generations today. But it's properly called an ordinary or a high bike. This bike here was found in Port Stanley, and it came from a 91-year-old guy, and he found it in a garage sale in 1959 in Burlington. He tried to ride it. He took out 36 spokes. He ripped the original seat. He ripped it in half. He bent the handlebars. I stabilized everything. I rebuilt the spoking on it, and it's a fabulous, and he lost the pedals. These are replicas that I have made in the Czech Republic. They're exact duplicate to the original, right down to the micrometer, a thousandth of an inch. This guy is phenomenal in Czech Republic. He builds everybody, all of us guys that build these and work on them, he makes our pedals for us. But it's a cool bike. It's about an 1885 Rudge, made in Coventry, England. This is where the mustache, the handlebar mustache, comes from. They term this the handlebar mustache. Well, that's this here. And it's got spade grips. Average speed on one of these is about 16 miles per hour. If the road conditions are good. If the road conditions are not, you're lucky to go 5. Now I talked about the bicycles becoming more safe, and the safety bike. That's why these guys were being called penny farthings. This is the generation here. Shortly after the development of this, a year after almost from this bike here, the Star bicycle was invented. They moved the big wheel to the back and the little wheel to the front. And this is treadle powered. Instead of being pedaled like so, it's pumped. There's a ratchet system in here with leather belts, like your socket wrench. So when you're tightening up with a socket wrench, it goes click, 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 click. The same mechanisms in there. So this rider, he would mount from a rear step on this side over here. When he mounted the cycle, he immediately start pumping. Unlike pedaling, you need to start pumping directly or you're going to go sideways. So you can pump like this, or you can pump like this with one pedal, or you can go like this. And the advantage of it is you're not going to go into what they call the header. Now the header is what takes a lot of us high wheel riders out. The bike will go forward like so when she locks up. You think your legs that are sitting here to the pedals, you're going to outstretch your legs. Your legs aren't going to meet the ground. They're going to follow the curvature of the wheel, and you're going to go into what they call a face plant. It results in fractured skulls, broken collarbones, and death. I've had 49 falls on one of these. I've been riding since 1989. I rode one in 97 from Maple, Ontario, north of Toronto, right through downtown Toronto, along Lakeshore to Niagara-on-the-Lake, crossed New York State to Albany, down the Hudson River, crossed the Delaware Gap, and rode to Philadelphia. I rode 750 miles in 9 days on a high bike. That enables me to talk about it, guys. And like Mike was saying, by riding, you live that part of history, and it enables you to talk about it colorfully. It is very colorful. Even crashing. On my ride, one example from that ride, we were unscathed riding across New York State till we got to Albany. We had guys throwing full cans of beer at us, trying to knock us off our bicycles, riding down the highway. We got to Albany, we had a street gang throwing sticks at us. And we were going down a bicycle path down to the Hudson. And Larry Strong, who was riding with me, Canadian power bike champion, him and I were riding side by side, and our grips just touched like that, just like that. He went that way into the tall grass. I went this way into a ditch. I went down the ditch, up the other side. I was airborne, and I was tumbling in the air. And the bike I could see tumbling behind me, and I landed in a rose bush from about this bike to the wall deep. And I landed on my back in it, and I saw the bike coming, and it went whack right in my head. I had a helmet on, thank God, because this part hit me in the right square in the head. It'd be like a ball-peen hammer hitting in the middle of the head. Immediately, these Muslim ladies started going, the Allah and all that. They thought I died, and they were freaking out. And this guy jumps off his 10-speed, and he runs over, and he grabs me by my ankles and tries to drag me through the rose bushes to get me out of there. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I dug my heels in the ground. I reached out with my hands. I said, pull my hands. And I tightened my body up rigid and lifted me up like this. I had thorns and thistles on me, and my buddy Pete Matthews, who was riding with me, he got great enjoyment with the tweezers he carried in his little tool pouch to pull the thorns out of my backside. So they are dangerous. You know, they're fun, but they are dangerous, and I warn so many people about them. The young guys think, oh, I'm just going to jump on it and ride it. Yeah, you might jump on it and ride it, but it's when you make that first turn that you find out, what did I just do wrong? And then you hurt yourself. I've seen professional guys break several bones in their bodies in a matter of seconds. Then moving like this bike here, so that, talk about that. This enabled you to ride safer. When you dismounted this bike, you would do it like popping a wheelie. So you would go backwards with it. You would pull back on the handlebars, slide off the seat gently, holding the brake so that you could ease the wheel back down to the ground. This bike here was owned by Howard Barkley in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Howard bought this bike in an antique shop in 1969 in Buffalo. He rode this bike every day from that day along the Niagara Escarpment till I got it 2 years before COVID. And he rode this so much, there's a hole worn out in the brake spoon here that I silver soldered in and repaired. He loved this bike. And he said one day it would be mine, and that day came. And now I tell his story. I may be the owner. We're all owners to a lot of things. We're only caretakers, and it's up to us to share those moments and stories for these individual items if you can. If it still has a story, carry that story. It's needed to carry that history. And then this unique little guy here, this is what they called a club kangaroo, made in Coventry by the Coventry machinist. This is again getting into moving away from the high bike and getting into a geared bike. The chains on it give it the equivalent gearing of a high bike of 54 inches. So the revolutions you're making there is equivalent to riding this big wheel, and you go the same speed, but it's safer. You could bail off of this in a heartbeat. And then the actual safety. This is Irish Swift safety made by the Coventry machinist, and this is getting into your first hard tire safety. And if you look at the tires closely, you'll see North Pole patent written on the side of the tire. That's because here in Canada, our winters, guys were riding these bikes in the wintertime, the rubber would freeze up and crack. The tires are guaranteed not to crack or wear from the winter rides. I don't think I want to ride in the wintertime with a bald tire. And then moving from the hard tire safety, we'll go up top here. This is an 1897 Rex. Everybody says, well, what's the trailing wheel? What's that all about? Well, if you follow the seat and the post going to the back, and then you follow the arm coming off the axle of the back, that's a swing arm affair. And what it does, it creates an artificial suspension to the bike. So the bike is actually working like a bird, floating like this. So you feel zero vibration on the bike. It also has spring-loaded handlebars. So the handlebars move like this. There's only 7 of these known in the world. This is the only Canadian found Rex known. I found this from the original family in Tillsonburg. And it was a 30-year restoration. I had to hire an Amish guy to make the back rim. Just a lot of work, a lot of conservation, a lot of research to ensure this bike will live another 100 years. And then this bike here is John P. McCloskey from Petrolia, Sarnia area, a big bicycle builder of that time. It's one piece of looping frame of wood. Can you imagine steaming that? The technology they had in that time frame of 1896 to bend wood to get that shape and contour, and it survived. And I first found this bike in Hensel, Ontario, my dad's hometown, and an antique dealer had it. My wife and I were next door in the shop, and I was buying bicycle photography from the 1890s from him. And I gave him my business card, and I said, I'm always looking for bicycles. He says, well, I have one in the house. He took me into the house, and this bike was sitting over the mantle with a roaring fire going. And I'm going, oh my God. I said, that's a rare bike. I said, that thing spark could ignite it, because it was so dry. And I tried to break a deal with him on it. I offered him $700. This is back in the 90s. That was a lot of money for a bicycle like this. It was just the frame, the fork, no wheels, no handlebars. The seat parts were missing. And that was a pretty good deal for him. He threw me out, told me to get lost. So 2 years later, my wife and I were at Christie's Antique Fair in Dundas. And I come walking into the antique grounds, and a buddy runs up. Rick, there's an old bicycle up the hill. You better get up there. And this is back when they didn't trim the grass at Christie's. It was usually knee high. I went running up there, and I'm standing in the grass, and I recognized the guy. I go, I heard you got an old bicycle. He says, you're standing on it. My foot was here and here. I just missed stepping on the frame. I would have collapsed it. And I go, what do you got to get out of this lump? And he goes, $125, and it was like pulling a handgun. I couldn't get it out fast. And then I said to him, I'm the fella that tried to buy this bike after I paid for it and everything I had in my hands. I said, I'm the guy that tried to buy it from you a couple of years ago. He lost it. He smashed all of his Crocs on the shelf at the show and just started kicking stuff, and oh, was he mad. He was so upset. But it got into my hands, and now you're able to see this thing of beauty. The lacing I did all by hand myself. I researched the tying of knots on other ladies' bikes I have that are original and copied the knots. These ladies would sit down on a Sunday, they would go on their bicycle ride together, and they would show their talents of doing needlework or knot tying. And they would make these special guards for their skirts. It's maybe 3 or 4 of these examples in the world, and this is the only one in Canada. It's a shame. It's made here in Canada, and it's the only existing example for a lady's John P. McCloskey. And then up here next to me is A.G. Spalding, of Spalding Sporting Goods fame, shaft drive bicycle. It's shaft driven, there's no chain. It runs on a drive mechanism and bevel gears to the back wheel, and it has a patented steering wheel. Think about this, this is 1896, this is even before automobiles thought of a steering wheel. They were using tiller on the earliest automobiles, tiller steering. This is an actual steering wheel. The downside, if you oversteer, you're gonna go end over end. Very good example. Found this one in North Jersey again, and it was another labor of love, and now you get to enjoy it. And then the next bike beside that is an E&D, Evans and Dodge. The Dodge brothers fame of Windsor, Ontario. The 2 Dodge brothers came from the US to hone their machining skills in Canada and Windsor, and teamed up with Evans, who ran a typographical company, and to learn more about machining. They developed the pedal crank system in 1895 and patented it. By 1896, they made this bicycle. This is the only known complete example of an Evans and Dodge. Even the Dodge family don't have it. And it's on exhibit here for a short time today, and then it's going to Windsor to be shown, but it'll never be sold as long as I'm alive, and it'll stay here in Canada. I'll start off with the Orient here. This is an 1897 Orient. You see a 1936 tag hanging on it here, but this bike was raced in 1897. I'm not sure of the fellow's name. I think this fellow's name that's on here was the fellow that acquired the bike and donated it to this bar. But the history that followed it, it was raced in front of Adolf Hitler in 1936. And I think the fellow that was riding it was an accomplished racer, and he was doing a stationary lap around the track before the actual races started. And this bike sat on the wall of this bar till my friend retrieved it in the 90s. There's still the original screw holes in the rim where they screwed it into the wall, and this plaque sat on the wall next to it. Obviously, notice the wooden handlebars and rims. The wooden handlebars were never there. These are the original racing bars, so somebody must have mistook this as being a wooden handlebar. That happens. I see it tons. People will see one object on it and think the rest of it is what it is. But those are original racing bars. They're adjustable racing bars. They call them Kelly bars. And it's a very rare original Orient piece. Waltham Museum and the state of Mass wants me to bring it there next year. I've got quite a collection of Orient and Marshmetz related items that the museum's never seen. And this bike here is a race cycle. It's got the wrong badge, just to be noted. I put that badge on because I did not have the proper one till Mr. Baker found me the correct one. And it's a Berlin badge. They were made in Berlin, Ontario, which is Kitchener. The company is originally from Middletown, Ohio, but they opened up a factory here in Canada, in Berlin, Ontario. And they were sold in Union too. The race cycle was sold out of Union. And this bike, you'll see, has a 12-inch sprocket. It takes 3 guys to push the rider to get them started on the board track. When they raced on a board track, if you can imagine 2x4s, instead of laying flat like this, but laying up like this. and they would just stack them up and get their curves for their high banks. And they would ride these a mile a minute. That's how fast they were going. Just amazing bike to be riding. I couldn't imagine it myself. Even if I was in top shape, I don't think I could ever get a mile in a minute. And then up top is about a 1905 Brantford. And I talked earlier about the CCM amalgamation, and Brantford was a company, the Brantford Gould, who made the high wheel. This is the Forerunner. This is the fledgling from that high bike out there. And when CCM took it over, this is the product line. They kept everybody's names attached to the badge, except it had Canadian Cycle Motor Company. Soon that was dropped and it just became CCM on the badge. And it got shortened up. It's a cushion frame. It's got a shock absorber in the back, a leaf spring frame, and the handlebars have a piston in them. So when you push down, they float like this. This bike was found near south of Sarnia in a cottage house in the attic. And the fellow said it belonged to his grandfather, and he used to ride it occasionally at flea markets and stuff, just to show it off. But he got up there in age, and he saw my display at the Bothwell Car Show and offered it to me. It's original paint with the original tires. The whole bike is the way it was found. Very rare Canadian example. Now I guess we have one more bike to talk about, Mike.
Yes.
The Lobach. This is an 1869 Lobach Velocipede. Now we were talking about the Velocipede era, how short-lived it was between February and October. Well, this came about in around that February period. Dr. William Lobach invented it, and it was more in line to this image here. Now, shortly thereafter, he sold the patent rights and the item to the Purcell brothers from New York City, who had a velocipede school, for around $15,000 in 1869. They altered the bike by making the seating arrangement over top of the pivoting mechanism, which I just can't physically understand or mathematically, because I think whoever rode this bike hurt themselves quite a bit. And if you think about it, $15,000 in 1869, that's quite a bit of money today. These guys likely never saw fruition of their investment, because by October, they said that in the literature that they sold a few examples of it, but they never met their quota for their money to be made. So another thing from the velocipede era, it was come and go. Blacksmiths tried to do it, a lot of people. But this is one of two examples in the world, a very, very rare piece. It belonged to a good friend of mine and a mentor, Lorne Shields. Lorne donated his bicycle collection in 1969 to the Ottawa Transportation Museum. And this is just one example of his great collection, which is rarely seen. This is the first time it's been seen since 1969, right, Mike? And it's a shame. I think it's pitiful. But we get to enjoy it for a very short time now. The window's closing on it. But that's it in a handbag, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me anything. We good? I thank you very... Oh, yes, the flight. Thank you. The what? Oh, yes, I forgot all about the wooden frame. Well, we'll spin around and we'll look at the flight first. CCM by 1936 wanted to redesign their business and try to get in the forefront of the American product line that were coming out. They were getting very artistic in design. And the CCM flight, this one here, came out in 1936. They sold it to 1939, and obviously the war just changed the whole persona of the whole bicycle industry. And then they went into full-blown war effort. But this is a rare example. It once belonged to a good friend of mine, and it was never finished, and I took it to the next level for him. And that's why it's being shown now. But the flights, there's maybe 20 in Canada, and there's several 39s and 37s, but only a handful of 36s. You're wondering what the big tube is in the frame? That's your battery tube for your light. Your dry cell batteries that you would use in your crank telephone in the day is the batteries that you would have put in that compartment for usage for your light. And it's got all the bells and whistles. That's 1936 mirror, 1936 Indian head bell that was in the CCM catalog, the flashlight, accessory flashlight, and the little whirligig, airplane with no wings with a whirligig on it for the child to get excited over, I guess. And then I'll come over here and I'll pull this right out for everybody so I'll hold it. This has been in the collection for a good number of years, a great number of years. And I bought this in Wallacestown at an auction, a farm auction, and it was one of the biggest auctions in Canada for steam tractors, threshing machines, steam engines, and that sort. And this bike came up, and I outbid an American buyer on it, unbeknown to me what make it was. And the information for this bike just recently came to float 2 weeks ago, I believe. And here's the patent drawings. And the fellow's name was William Ross, and he was from London, Ontario. So this is a Canadian wooden frame bike. We were well known for our wooden frame bicycles and our wooden rims, but this is one of two known. The other one is in New Brunswick now, and same shape, same nothing on it, no pedals. So what I think he did was he possibly just invented this and didn't go further than that. That's what we're thinking, we're debating on right now. So until we investigate it, and this is what you always do when you got this stuff, you just don't jump and think, oh, this is the way they must have did it. No, you investigate. Every one of these pieces here takes sometimes 10 years of research before you get the answers. And you just don't ad-lib it. You don't shoot from the hip and say, well, it would take that, it would take this. It takes research. But it's a cool example, and I brought it here today just for you guys also. And thought it'd be a cool piece, nice wooden frame. I guess that's it. That's all I wrote. Now, do we have any questions?
You want to divulge how much you paid for that?
$1,600. And the American bidder was really peeved at me. He's from Detroit. And he said, "You're not taking that home." I said, "Yes, I am." I did the bobblehead. We just sat there. I actually bought all the bicycles that were there. And all the oil lamps and all the gas lamps. I think I ticked off a few guys. But they're only going to resell it. Some of these guys are antique dealers, and to see that Detroit guy now, when you think about that's a Canadian treasure, to take another Canadian artifact across the border that will never be seen again. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Gertjan Moed from the Netherlands with the biggest museum in the world. He just quoted yesterday. He talked about the Kopek auction in New York. He said, the Kopek auction opens the door to the black hole where bicycles never get seen again. They go into collections and not exhibited. They go into private collections. These guys don't share to nice people like yourselves. I love sharing what I collect. I love talking about what I collect, and possibly one of you will be inspired by it. You know, and maybe it'll grow like a seed inside you, and it's, man, that was pretty cool. It is cool, and it is fun, and I encourage it to anybody. Collect something. Doesn't matter what it is. Cigar box like I first started out with. You could collect bottles. It don't matter. Collect something, because the museums don't have that capability anymore. And it's up to us to keep that history alive. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.